Chapter 24. Outside the city, Dragon waited. Even after Minley had disappeared, the dragon still watched from the trees. He had felt odd when she had passed the old stone lions and the door had closed behind her. He realized that he had never had a friend before, and what a nice feeling it was to have one. And perhaps that was why the second night, when the sky darkened and the moon rose, Dragon crept out from the shadow of the trees and approached the closed, sleeping city. While he wouldn't admit it, Dragon thought just standing by the walled city might make him feel just a bit less lonely. The silver moon cast a frosted glow upon the rough stone wall and guardian lion statues. Dragon stared at them as he approached the gate. Their stocky, heavily built bodies seemed to weigh down the stone platforms they sat upon. In the darkness of the night made their stiff, curly manes look like rows of carved blossoms. One lion held a round ball underneath his forearm. The other held down a lion cub that seemed to be grinning at him. In fact, all the lions seemed to be grinning at him, as if he were a secret joke they were watching. "Am I so funny?" Dragon asked them as he passed. "Yes," burst out the small lion cub, wriggling free of his mother's paw. "You're very funny." As Dragon jumped back in surprise, the lion cub laughed out loud, obviously highly amused at the dragon's shock. But with his laugh, both adult lions shook themselves from their platforms. "Xiao Mao," the mother lion scolded, "don't laugh at the lost dragon. Besides, you know the rules, no moving in the presence of others." "But it's a dragon," the cub said, "not a people. He doesn't count for the rules, does he? Besides, he is funny. Big dragon trying to tiptoe like a mouse." "Xiao Mao," the deep male voice of the other lion boomed in the air. The cub gave a half-hearted look of shame and was immediately quiet and still. By this time, the dragon found his voice. "You're alive, then?" he said. "Of course we are," the male lion said, scrutinizing the dragon with interested eyes. "Everything's alive. The ground you're walking on, the bark of those trees. We were always alive, even before we were lions, and we're just raw stone. However, carving did us a bit more personality. Carving did give us a bit more personality. You're a fairly young dragon, aren't you?" the female lion said kindly. "You seem only 100 or 150 years old. Don't worry, you'll learn soon enough." 100, the lion cub said. "I'm much older than you. I'm 868. "And you still have not attained wisdom," the father lion told him. "Don't tease the young one." "Well, what are you doing here?" the cub asked, not unkindly. "Dragons don't usually come down to the earth much. Are you lost?" Though unusual, the lions weren't unfriendly, so Dragon settled down and told them the whole story. Being born, living in the forest, meeting Minli, and now their travels to find the borrowed lion and the old man of the moon. The lions didn't interrupt once, though the cub did snicker from time to time. "You belong to Magistrate Tiger," the cub said when Dragon had finished. "That means you're the terrible dragon. You're the one that destroyed the king's father's palace. What a lot of trouble you caused." Dragon looked at the older lions questioningly. "About 100 years ago," the female lion said, "the king's father fled his home village. A dragon had destroyed his palace, and his people had cast him out, saying he was bad luck. He came here intending to make his home with the sun and to live off his son's wealth and power as the king of the city of bright moonlight. There were bad times here for the city, as the king's father and the officials he brought with him were corrupt and greedy. We were very concerned." "You," the dragon asked, "why would it concern you?" "Why would it concern us? It's completely our concern," the male lion said. "We are the guardians of the city. It is our responsibility to watch and keep the city turning." To see it begin to crack alarmed us to no end, and the lion held out the round ball he held in his hand and showed Dragon an old deep fracture that was slowly being filled with the dust of the earth. "What did you do?" Dragon asked. "A string of destiny. We were afraid the city would break. As the times became more turbulent with secret meetings and violent outbursts, we watched the crack and our world widen. It was only a matter of time, we thought, before it would tear into two. One night, as we despaired, we saw a figure walking in the moonlight, bent and old. He glowed like a lit lantern. When we saw he was carrying a large book in a small sack, we knew instantly it was the old man of the moon and called him over. 'Please help us,' we begged him. 'We need to keep the city together.' The old man of the moon looked at us, our outstretched cracking globe and our pleading faces. Without a word, he sat down before us and opened his book, leafing through the pages and stroking his beard. After several minutes of consulting his book, he opened his sack and handed us a red thread. 'You are to hold this until it is needed,' the old man told us, and then slapped his book shut and walked away, ignoring our words of thanks. We knew the old man of the moon had given us a string of destiny, one of the very strings he used to bind people together. It was a marvelous gift. While he left us no instructions, we guessed that we were to use it to tie around the city, looked as if it were to split. After that, night after night, we watched our sphere, ready to use the string for the first sign of breakage. Unsure of its power or abilities, we dared not use it for anything but the direst of circumstances. But the crack did not grow. Unexpectedly, the king renounced his father. He exiled him and his officials from the city, and harmony returned. Slowly, the fracture has filled with the powder of earth and stone, and I have held the string unused. And as the male lion finished, he lifted his paw to reveal a flattened line of red thread. The borrowed line, the dragon said. That's it. Minli said she needed it to get the borrowed line from the guardian of the gate. Guardian of the city. You're that guardian, and that's the borrowed line we need. I suppose it is, the lion said, looking at the string, so perhaps I've been holding it all this time, so I could give it to you. And the lion dropped the string into the dragon's outstretched hands. Chapter 25. Ma and Ba found the days without Minli long and difficult. In the morning, as soon as they woke up, they rushed to Minli's bed to see if she were there. In the afternoon, they hurried from the fields, hoping to find Minli waiting at home. At night, with a rice bowl and a set of chopsticks waiting for her at the table, they looked up at every sound of footsteps. But an empty bed and house always greeted them, and the footsteps always belonged to a passing neighbor. While Ma's anger had disappeared with the goldfish man, she grew a little thinner and paler every day, and Ba's eyes no longer twinkled. And one evening in the middle of the night, Ba woke up alone in bed to a voice calling, "Wake up, old man," the fish said. "Wake up, your wife needs you." Ba quickly rose and looked for Ma, who was sitting in Minli's bed. In the stillness of the darkness, Ma shook with sobs. "Oh, wife," Ba said softly, sitting next to her. Ma turned to him, her face shining from wet tears. "What if Minli never returns?" Ma said. "What if we are always without her?" Ba put his hand over his face, brushing away the tears that were forming in his eyes. "I don't know," he said. "Neither do I," Ma said, and she buried her face in Minli's bed, crying in despair. Ba stroked her hair as she wept, occasionally closing his eyes as he fought his own gloom. Finally, as Ma's crying slowed and calmed, Ba said, "Do you remember the story I told you about the paper of happiness and the secret, which was one word written over and over again?" The back of Ma's head nodded, and Ba allowed himself a small smile. "I have thought a long time about what that word could have been," Ba said. "Was it wisdom or honor, love or truth? For a long time I liked to think that the word was kindness." Ma's face remained hidden in Minli's bed, but her sobs had stopped, and Ba knew she was listening. "But now," Ba said, "I think perhaps the word was faith." A faint gray light seeped into the room, and as if the moon was escaping from the clouds, Ma lifted her head and looked at Ba again. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve and gave a small, sad smile. "Perhaps," she said, "perhaps you're right," and she placed her hand wet with tears in his. Chapter 26. The next morning, Minli woke up alone under a heavy, rich blanket. Even though she was on the floor of the garden pagoda, she had slept comfortably, and as she sat up, she realized that probably due to the silk pillow she'd been lying on. The soft sunlight cast leaf shadows across her face, and the wind made gentle ripples in the moss-colored lake in front of her. The imperial garden was just as beautiful in the day as it had been at night. On one side of her lay a small table with a small pot of tea, a bowl of rice porridge, and tea-stained eggs. Breakfast, Minli thought to herself, but before she reached for it, she saw that a yellow brocade traveling bag lay on the other side of her. Inside the bag, Minli found her humble blanket, rabbit rice bowl with needle and bamboo piece, chopsticks, a generous supply of cakes, and her hollow gourd full of fresh water. On the very top lay the golden threaded pouch that held the ripped page of fortune. Minli took the pouch and held it with two hands. "Well, I have the borrowed line," Minli thought. "At least I hope it is." So after a quick breakfast, Minli quietly left the pavilion. Part of her was tempted to explore the mosaic walkways through the jeweled-colored leaves, but she knew being discovered by one of the king's counselors would be disastrous. Also, she knew Dragon was patiently waiting outside the city, so using the king's secret door, Minli carefully left the garden walls of the inner city. When she was out of the garden, Minli realized it was very early morning. The outer city was still sleepy. The stands were bare and the umbrellas were closed. Quickly, Minli scurried to the gate. With great effort, she was able to get through. She had to use a metal pole she found on the ground to lift the lock and lever of one of the doors open. Even then, she was only able to get it open and crack and had to squeeze. As she fell through the gate, gasping for air, she was shocked to see Dragon lying in front of the stone, lying sleeping. It took a couple of prods before Dragon awoke, and his loud morning yawns almost put Minli in a panic, but they were able to get back to the hiding shelter of the forest before anyone saw them. "What were you doing by the city?" Minli asked. "You were supposed to stay hidden." "I was getting the borrowed line," Dragon said. "What do you mean?" Minli said. "I have the borrowed line." And in a rush, the two of them told each other about their night adventures. Dragon stared at the ripped page from the book, and Minli looked at the red cord in Dragon's hand. "So which is the real borrowed line?" Dragon asked Minli. "I guess that is another question we'll have to ask the old man of the moon," Minli said. Chapter 27. With both borrowed lines, Minli and the dragon continued their journey. Minli remade her compass with her rabbit rice bowl and followed the needle's pointed direction. As they traveled, the land became more barren, rocky, and steep, without trees to tame it. The wind blew wildly, burning Minli's cheeks red with cold. The icy air shoved and pushed them, as if trying to keep them back. Late in the afternoon, after traveling up stony ground, Dragon made a noise. "Look up ahead," he said. Far ahead of them seemed to be a spot of bright yellow. Against the gray landscape, it seemed like a fallen piece of gold. "Is that a forest? Trees with yellow leaves?" Minli asked. Then she looked at the gray stones surrounding them. "But what trees could grow here?" "I think there's a village," Dragon said, squinting his eyes. "If there is, we can get you some warmer clothes." Even though the cold hadn't bothered the dragon, he noticed her shivering. "We won't reach it before night," Minli said, "but I think there's a cave up ahead. Let's stay there for the night, and tomorrow we'll try to reach the village or whatever it is." The dragon agreed, and they made camp in the cave. The king's supply of traveling cakes saved her and Dragon from hunger, but Minli wished for the thick silk blanket. Even in the shelter of the cave, away from the wind, the earth was stark and cold. Minli built a fire as quickly as she could and sighed as its warmth slowly heated the air. But that night, Minli could not fall asleep. Even with the dragon snoring behind her, the fire crackling, and her blanket around her shoulders, her eyes did not close. Like the stone dust that the wind blew, thoughts kept circling in her head. She kept thinking about Ma and Ba and the orphan buffalo boy. With pangs of guilt, she thought about Ma and Ba pushed her to go home early from the field, how her rice bowl was always the first filled, how every night when she went to sleep in her warm bed she knew they were there, and how worried they must have been that now she was not. The buffalo boy didn't have that. Instead, he had a dirt floor, a pile of grass for his bed, a muddy buffalo, and a secretive friend. Yet he turned away her copper coin and laughed in the sun. Minli couldn't quite understand it and somehow felt ashamed. But just as Minli shook her head with confusion, there was a sudden sound outside the cave. What was that? She cocked her head. Then it was again like a low grumble of thunder. Was it going to rain? Minli quietly got up and slipped out of the cave to see, but when she got outside, she screamed. The noise had not been the grumble of thunder. It had been the growl of a tiger. The giant tiger snarled and then jumped right at Minli. Chapter 28. The wind screamed as Ma and Ba ate their dinner. The shutter of their house waved and slammed, shaking the house, and the light from their lantern wavered. They looked at each other and wordlessly went to the window. "There is fear in the wind," the fish said. "Great worry." "Is it a storm?" Ma asked. Ba looked at the fish. It stared at him with big eyes. "I'm not sure," Ba said. The tree branches bent in the wind violently, as if being shaken by the city. The wind shrieked again, and the cold air gusted into the house. The water in the fishbowl rippled, and the fish swayed in the bowl. Both Ma and Ba shivered. "Do you think Minli is outside in this?" Ma faltered. "I hope not," Ba said. The wind continued to slap the house and trees. The whole earth seemed to shudder at the screeching wind. Only the moon above was still. Ba looked at Ma and saw her soundless lips move as she gazed at the moon. He knew what she was doing and did the same. "Please," he implored the moon silently, "please watch over Minli. Please keep her safe." The moon continued to shine.